Welcome back. You're now watching the lifestyle segment of the weekend show brought to you by Holocrunch, Crunchy Yummy Goodness. The topic of discussion today is the maltreatment of domestic workers and aides across the country. Around the world, we all know workers who work in isolation where nobody is watching are particularly vulnerable to violence and harassment at work. Millions of women and girls around the world turn to domestic work as one of the few options available to them in order to provide for themselves and their families. Instead of guaranteeing their ability to work with dignity and free of violence, people have systematically denied them key labor protections extended to other workers. The long list of abuses committed by employers and labor agents include physical, psychological, and sexual abuse, forced confinement in the workplace, non-payment of wages, and excessively long working hours with no rest days. In the worst situations, women and girls are trapped in situations of forced labor or have been trafficked into forced domestic work in conditions akin to slavery. Increased awareness has unfortunately not been matched by concerted government action. Domestic workers, often making extraordinary sacrifices to support their families, are among the most exploited and abused workers in the world. Abuses against domestic workers, typically taking place in private homes and hidden from the public eye, have garnered increased attention in recent years. Joining us on today's program to discuss this, we have...
It is my pleasure to introduce Adebimpe Femi-Oyewole. She is the founder of Kinnect and lead consultant. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
It's also my pleasure to welcome Precious Wakili. She is the founder of Girl Child Support Values Initiative. Welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thank you.
Dimpe, let me start with you. In a typical 9-to-5 job, you understand how many hours you're working.
Right.
You understand you go into the office, you leave the office, you go home, freshen up, do what you have to do to take care of your personal self, then you return to work the next day. It's stipulated right there in your contract. But most times we see that domestic workers live with their bosses, so there is no closing hour or starting hour. What do the labor laws say? How many hours are domestic workers legally allowed to work before it's seen as abuse and a contravention of the protection of their laws?
Right, thank you for that. So I think typically domestic workers are meant to work about 9 hours, but you see in a country like Nigeria, they work 14 to 16. And as you mentioned, the most vulnerable are the ones that actually stay in the house, right? You know, because there is no closing time and so there is a lot of abuse that comes from that. And I think one of the issues that occurs is because there's a lack of contract. You know, a lot of us, when we go into a job, there's a contract, there are terms, but there's no terms and there's no protection for them. And so even if they don't want to work those hours, they don't have a voice to speak up.
So you mentioned about how most of them don't have contracts, which
Right.
is why some of these malpractices happen. But we've also seen, like in the case of housemaids, every year there's a video of someone maltreating maybe a maid or a nanny or a carer. And we've also noticed in most cases, those maids and nannies are even minors.
Yeah.
And Precious, I'll bring this to you. Most of these people are minors, they're not contracted. What is anybody doing about this, where you see an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old taking care of children 5 and below, and they're about 4, their guardians or people who are responsible for them?
I think in the case of minors, they are not supposed to be domestic helps at the very instance because they don't even know how to take care of themselves, most of them. So when they bring them to do these jobs, they just tell their parents, oh, we want to put them in school, we want to make sure that they grow up having a good life. Then when they come, because their parents are not there, their guardians are not there, then they now make them to do these domestic works and they start telling them, oh, clean, do this, do that. But in a country like Nigeria, we are not supposed to do that. But we don't have laws guiding them. Even if we have laws, we don't even obey the laws. So that's why they bring young people or young children to come and be domestic helps.
I wonder what's behind, what drives the psychology that in order to help somebody, you have to sort of take advantage of them. It's the same issue we fight, during our campaign against child marriage. You would hear grown adults defend child marriage because the child comes from a very poor family.
Yeah.
So the justification for child marriage has become, well, I'm taking care of the child, I'm sending the child to school, I'm protecting the child, therefore I can marry someone who's 13 years old.
Right.
And it's the same thing that applies here. People enslave children and say, okay, I'm sending them to school, I'm giving her 3 square meals, and I'm taking care of the child. So what's wrong with the child taking care of my own children? So it's like, I wonder what's behind that psychology. Why have we bred a culture which believes that this is okay? Why is this acceptable in our society? Why has it become a cultural norm?
I think it's because you also mentioned one of it. It's that a lot of these people come from poor backgrounds. A lot of them don't have vocational or educational training, and a lot of them also come from marginalized communities. And so it's, people think that they can get away with it and take advantage of them because what's really going to happen? And like Precious mentioned, sometimes there might be laws, but these laws are not enforced. And you can't really hold the employees to it, and even the authorities are not doing anything about it. And I think in the last question, we talked about minors, and I'm thinking like a lot of agencies, we need to also have better regulations for agencies that actually recruit these girls, because a lot of them recruit minors, and then a lot of them also withhold their salaries. They don't end up paying them. A lot of agents take commission. Sometimes it's a one-off commission, and other times it's like till they are working with this employee. And so there needs to be better regulation with that as well.
Now, talking about physical and the real abuse, we've seen people slap their staff, like even in corporate organizations. We've seen in families, people slap their security officers, their drivers, and then these kids. Now, it's become almost normal. What do you think, Precious, should be done about the physical violence and abuse which we've seen constantly, year in, year out? We see people go to the police, it may be on the news, and after that, the story disappears. What exactly should be done to make this stop?
Like you said, physical abuse is something that is rampant. I mean, we hear our neighbors, we see it everywhere. And these children cannot report. I remember I reported a case when I was still in SS2 of a small girl who stays with her auntie, and her auntie, she begged for Capri Sun in school, and her auntie decided to put pepper in her private parts. And when I reported to the policeman did not even do anything. He was like, why would she go and beg? I mean, so the law agencies here are not even enforcing the laws. So the only thing that can happen is for us citizens to take it upon ourselves. If we see something, we say something, we should do something about it. E.g., like how we carry placards and go on social media, not, how would I put it, riots kind of placards, but making it let people know that this is what is going on in the society, giving hashtags like the hashtag that they gave, give them free pads, women free pads. We can start our own hashtag and say, stop maltreating domestic helps and aids, like things like that. That's the only way it can happen, because the agencies are not doing anything. But individuals, we citizens of the country, can do something about it if we want to do something about it. But if we decide to act laissez-faire, like, oh, it's not my business, sorry, excuse me, it's not my business, it doesn't have to do with me, that's when it's going to continue and it will never stop.
I wonder what part we the citizens have to play in this, because we talk about government all the time, the law enforcement agencies, like you've rightly elucidated, but the reality is that people who grew up abroad and are not allowed to, perpetrate this sort of behavior on their maids or their domestic workers will find it more difficult to come here and do that. But in a country where in secondary school, you fight, nothing is done to you. You fight your teacher, you fight your classmates, you beat up, the domestic workers in the school, and nothing is done to you. It sort of breeds that mentality that this is an okay behavior. I say it all the time that once you break the law and there are no consequences attached to that breaking of the law, it becomes the norm. It becomes the norm in the society. So with this domestic abuse, perpetrated against the domestic workers, do you feel like there's something cultural that we need to break? There's this cultural norm that we need to now go back to the drawing board and sort of sensitize ourselves, reacculturate the system and say, okay, this is not okay. Let's go to the root of this problem, which is the fact that, yes, as you said, actions are lacking consequences, number one, and number two, it's just been something that's accepted right from the very beginning of our childhood. Bimpe.
Yeah, I agree. I think that abuse is a part of our society. We see it every day. You're driving, you see someone beating someone, you see police use violence when it's not needed, you see bosses hit their staff. And so I think that, first of all, we don't even view domestic workers as actual workers because they don't have a contract. So when you talk of the bottom, that's where we put them. And even in the workplace, that there is contract, there is abuse going on. There's a lot of abuse in a lot of offices. And so I think that we really, and I don't think that, I see people go abroad and they know what to do because there are consequences. So we know better. It's just when there are no consequences for one's action, there's no reason for them to change the behavior. And it's kind of like you feel like a lot of people feel like they're beneath them, they're inferior, you're helping them. A lot of people have a savior complex. Well, I'm giving you a job. It's like we all have occupations and we all work for someone, and we don't expect that our boss would think that we would work 7 days a week all the time, 16 hours. We would think that was unfair, but we go back and do it to them because we don't see them as workers. We feel like it's almost like a property. I'm paying for you to go to school, you're staying in my home, and then so should I pay you? And so we really need to be honest with ourselves. I think there are no consequences, and I think that, we need to stop waiting for the government or agencies or officials. That's not gonna happen. We need to actually, we've seen, especially, I've been very happy with 2019. We've seen the power of social media with a lot of cases where, when, there was that senator that was hitting that girl and people were like, no, started spreading it. So we need to police things now because we know that the government is not going to do it. And we know what is right. And I think if you think about it, they're human beings. So what you want for your family, what you want for your sister, do unto others as you want them to do unto you is basic. And so if you would think that this would be cruel, don't do that to them. It's that simple.
Well, you mentioned fairness, for instance, and we talk a lot about equality. So when we come to several spaces, we talk about equality politically, economically, socially, and the likes. However, with most of these people, like you've said, there's this savior complex of we're helping them. And some people argue that these kids would have been home, not going to school, not doing anything, and so they've brought them to town. School fees, for instance, are at an all-time high. And so the situation where you see people put their own kids in private schools and then put the support staff in public schools, or they get certain meals for their own children and certain meals for the other staff. What's your take on that?
I mean, I can't speak to anyone's finances. I'm not saying that you should put them in private school. That's your, that would depend on how much you have, because some people are barely getting by, right? And so, but I think that you should just be fair to them. So rationing someone's food or withholding their salary because they didn't do something that, you didn't think was correct, and not really training them and not being fair to them, just being. So I think that as far as finances, that would just depend on what people had to give. But I think being fair, and I think we all know what being fair is. We talk about equality, but there is more of equity. There's already like a disparity because a lot of them come from very poor backgrounds. And so equity is just making sure that they have access to the basic things, whether that's education, and not to feel enslaved because, they're now in the city going to school. So that means you can hit them and like punish them and lock them up. It doesn't give you any right to do that.
We're going to open up the phone lines. The number to call is 080-537-89021. That's 080-537-89021. Call and share your thoughts, your experiences with us. Precious, I'll come to you now. There's this trend of hiring domestic staff through agents. It wasn't like this back in the day.
Yeah.
So there's this, crop of agents that have come. There are these crop of agents that have come up and are taking charge of the hiring process. However, the flip side to that has been that these agents are now the ones perpetrating the injustice against the domestic workers. They're, as Bimpe said earlier, withholding salaries. Some of them are actually bringing in underage girls, underage boys. Some of them are stealing children. So there's a huge racketeering going on, and NAPTIP has actually spoken about it before. If you have a maid under the age of 18, we had the DG here. She says that's human trafficking. That is not okay. So I would want you to react to that. But we have a caller now. Your name and where you're calling from? Good morning. Your name and where you're calling from?
Good morning. My name is Ayo. Calling from South City Estate.
Okay, Ayo. What's your contribution to the conversation?
Many of the things that happen in this country are very wrong because men just feel they can do anything because it's like they are masculine gender and it's like gender and no. Right.
Sorry, Ayo, do me a favor and turn down your television set so we can hear you better.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I've turned it down now.
All right, continue.
But I can't really hear you over the line because I turned it down.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, you can continue with your contribution.
Okay, so there are so many situations in the country and the new generation coming in. So it's like, just feel like, okay, right now I am a man and I have to dominate the feminine gender. And they have that authority of being the dominant force in the society. And we need to put an end to that. That's why the government and people at the higher level of influence make the right decisions to put an end to all this, so that the killing and the bad things going on in the country should stop. Because right now, all what we need in this life are good men and good women. If that can be made possible, then I think we can all live together in a very good peace and everything will go on well in the country.
Thank you so much, Aya, for your contribution to the conversation. And did you want to recap that quickly?
So what Aya is trying to say is, basically, most of this maltreatment of domestic staff starts from individuals, from men trying to be the dominant ones, and so because they try to oppress, say, the women in their house, the females, the next person learns that, oh, once they have a little bit of power, then they try to take it out on the next person, and so the man is oppressing the woman says, oh, this is my staff, and so they now have authority, and they continue. And so at the end of the day, what he's trying to say is that it still comes down to all of us. We now need to be better people. I need to be a better man, you need to be a better woman, because if you aren't, then it now transfers to people working for and around you. Do you agree with that, Precious?
Yes. Okay, talking about being a better person, I usually tell people that anybody staying with you is a physical expression of you. So if that person goes out looking all tattered, looking all not nice, it all goes down to you. But if that person comes out and is looking nice, looking beautiful, the glory goes back to you, it doesn't go back to that person. So why don't you treat that person nice so that that person can represent you very well? I remember my church last year, we during the Teenagers and Children's Week, the church authority had to come out and say, please, if you have someone staying with you and you cannot take care of them, please send them back to their parents. Because we, the teachers, the teenagers teachers, we're tired of telling a child, come and do something, but because of low self-esteem, he or she is not looking nice, they can't come out and do that thing because other children are looking nice. So if you cannot take care of them, take them back to their parents. And we saw a rapid change in it. Children start coming out looking nice, your hair will be well done, and that's how it was. But if we are not better people ourselves, we cannot be better to somebody else. So it has to start from us. The change has to start from us. We must be better people so that we can reflect it in the lives of other people, so that they can look at us and be like, okay, this person is a better person. I have to be a better person too. That's what I think.
In the context of the agency question I asked earlier before we got the call, how do we, do we do away with this whole advent of, agents hiring your domestic workers completely? Or is there a way we could reform it to make it more equitable for those who are involved?
So many of these so-called agents are doing it for their personal gain. For instance, she said they pay the salaries to these agents. So I feel an agency should come up with a database of people who are willing to work for other people. So we can now know their age, their birth certificates, they bring the necessary documents we need so that they can be able. So anybody that wants, just like how we have the Uber and how they match people, we can match you up with someone to work with them, instead of someone just going to the village and picking up somebody's child and say, oh, come to the city, we have school, we have everything for you. But if an agency should come up, there's a contract, you write your name, the hours of job, the hours you would want to spend on a job, and everything like that. You see that it will be better for the society. I mean, all these maltreatments will be reduced. But if an agent or one person just comes and take a group of children, and as of last year, we heard so many stories that people were stealing children because they will tell you, I will give you 50,000, I'll give you 100,000 peanuts, but they will take these children, and some of these children are even raped in the house, and nobody's saying anything because they are getting the money. And stay there now. What are you doing? And you're going to school. Even if he raped you, it's nothing wrong. And these children end up at the later on being depressed or start doing some things that, so it's just crazy that some of these agents just try to like use these children for their own personal gain. So I feel an agency should come up with the basic requirements.
They should reform their ways. Adebimpe, do you agree?
Yes, I agree. I talked about how it's not really about just matching people, but I think they also need to negotiate their terms of offer, because a lot of these people are coming from backgrounds that they just want a job, they just want to leave poverty, and they don't know better, they just want to take anything, and so they should be able to negotiate their terms of offer, negotiate those contracts, making sure that the work hours are fair and not unethical. And I think, for example, I've heard of an agent that he actually recruits young girls, and he recently sent a 13-year-old to an older woman, and she has no cell phone, and so obviously her family wanted to make sure that she got there okay, because she's coming from Kwara, and they're calling the older woman, and she's like, you can't call this number, you can't speak to this girl. Yes, and it's become a huge situation, because apparently the girl doesn't want to stay there anymore, but the woman is like, she already paid the agent the fee, and he's not trying to return it, and so now this is forced labor. This is like what we're talking about, and no one knows where this girl went to. She came from Kwara, and so no one can really get her. She's like in Lagos. Lagos is huge, so no one really knows, and even the agent's wife is claiming she didn't really get to the house. They picked her up somewhere, so she has no phone. She's in Lagos. This is how people get trafficked. This is how people get into, this is slavery. This is like modern day slavery. We have just like made it okay because they're in their house. We're giving them, portion food, and so at this point it's to the point where no one really knows the way forward, and this agent is not very receptive. He's supposed to be somewhere in Calabar, no one can really reach him, and so it's become a thing of the family is calling, begging, will come pick her up, and I actually think he's trying to make sure that it's up to a month, otherwise he would have to return the money. Yes, and so he's trying to stall, even though technically the girl, they've been trying to get the girl since like day 3.
In summary, what you're saying is we need better regulation.
We need better regulation.
So it's not necessarily about doing away with it,
right?
Because they'll just find a different means.
Exactly, because agents can be very helpful, because if they're more educated, they can speak on their behalf, and they can be a middleman if something is going wrong. Okay, we agreed to these terms. They said there's abuse. There's so it can be helpful. They can be a voice to for these people, but that's not what they're in for. They just want to make the money, and they don't care what happens to them. And now this 13-year-old girl, no one knows what has happened.
Where she is today. But definitely those people need to contact the NAPTIP to track them, because there is a hotline for that,
Okay.
where you just send them the details of the individual that's missing or trafficked in this case, and they will track the individual and bring the perpetrators to justice. I know we had a caller. I'm not quite sure if you're still on there. Your name and where you're calling from?
Hello, morning. My name is Kachi. I'm calling you.
Sorry, your name is what? Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Can you speak up?
My name is Kachi. I'm calling you from Kaduna.
Okay, good morning, Kachi. What's your contribution to the conversation?
Well, I think the child they were taking, I think we have some robots that take care of them. However, when somebody is about 15 years of age and you bring he or she to your house, most of the time you find out they get to abuse the opportunity given to them, waste stuff from the house. I've had friends talking about that. So my suggestion is, if you're fed up of that kind of person, just ship the person back home. Hello?
Yes, we could hear you.
That's my own suggestion is, if you're fed up of whoever need or whoever is helping your housekeeper or whatever the person is, ship the person back home.
Okay, thank you so much for that contribution. Andy?
And that does make sense. So the fact that you've paid for an item, so for instance, you buy food and it's bad, do you still eat it? So you've recruited people to work for you, and you feel maybe you don't like their behavior or they're stealing from you, as opposed to treating them like slave or property, like Kachi is saying. How about you send them back home? But we must insist that hiring, because I wouldn't call it recruiting, hiring minors to work as domestic staff is against the law. And so if you need that support, or you want to actually take care of people, or you see it as your own goodwill which you're doing to a family, then let it be so. It shouldn't be that it's for work. And so don't recruit minors, and treat the minors, and treat them as well as you treat your children. It doesn't even mean you have to spend the same amount of money, but it's important that, like Ayo said, we are human first. We need to be good people before we can be good to other people. Otherwise, the trend just continues.
That's a fine way to wrap it up. Adebimpe, Precious, thank you so much for coming in today's program. To follow this conversation, visit our social media handles at Weekend Show NG on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. The conversation continues. Keep it locked here on The Weekend Show. We'll take a short break, and we'll be right back.